Aditi from Denison University. The talk title is Computational Analysis of the Transformation of Former Colonial Countries.
My presentation. So you already mentioned that it's about colonialism. And to begin, I'm just going to explain why I think I chose this topic and what instigated this. So just a little anecdote or a little background. I grew up in Malaysia and I went to a British school. And so I remember when I was in the 8th grade, we had British textbooks and we were asked to talk about colonialism and whether it was justified or not. And in the textbook, it was like 3 pages of why colonialism is this incredible thing that the British did, and maybe half a page on why it wasn't, like, maybe it wasn't the best thing because it cost the lives of so many people. And from there, it really made me think about education and the way education curriculum is designed, and also the idea that, like, history is written by the winners. And so because of that, it was probably around then that I really got interested in the idea of colonialism and doing an analysis on it, because oftentimes when you watch debates or when you watch people speak on colonialism, and if you try to argue the side of it wasn't justifiable, or at least in my experience, a lot of it ends up being disregarded because it's anecdotal. So this was using my data analytics skills that I learned in college. It was really just a way for me to bring in the technical side, to use a data set from the Harvard Dataverse, look at machine learning algorithms, look at regression analysis to really quantify what colonialism was like using this historical context, and really bring all the millions of anecdotes together to life. So that's just a little bit of why I decided to pursue this project. So we can move on. So like I said, a little bit about the British Empire. The British, when they took over, they colonized most of the world. They covered over 24% of the Earth's land, and they took over 458 million people. So they had a large influence on a lot of countries' histories. And if we go to the next slide, this really led to my research question. And my research question was really trying to understand, when we look at present day, when we look at where we are right now, how can we measure the impact of what these colonial companies did to the countries that are here right now? So looking at how they've developed and how they've changed. So from there, I'm going to go into the next slide, and it's really going to explain by, first of all, looking at it through a case study point of view. So if, for example, we take India as a case study, we can see that India, before colonialism, took over about the Indian share of the world's economy was over 80%. And by the time they left, it fell to much below 20%. Or India's share of the world trade, it was about 90%. And by the time colonialism ended, it was still below 20% as well. And as Sashi Tharoor once famously said, India in this case famously paid for its own oppression. We can see by just the statistics of how much colonialism impacted India. And this is just one of the many, many examples. So from here, we can go to the next slide, and this will explain really the larger questions of, when we don't look at India, but we look at all the different colonies. This paper aims to look at how can we better understand the impact or the transformation of colonial rule. So could you try clicking into that link for me, please? Okay, so
yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, so because either one I go, I
okay.
think it's,
No
yeah.
worries. You can just go to
Yeah.
the next slide. I have the image of it as well. Yeah. So over here, we get like an executive summary. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of regression analysis went into it. There's not too much time, so I'm happy to talk offline as well. But a big part of what I did was building a multi-regression model, or a multivariate regression model, because there's so many different variables that will impact how a colony was transformed when we look at what a colony went through. So the 3 big factors that I used to assess the colonial transformation was social, political, and economic. And that was the response variable, which when we sum that up gives us the transformation score. So when you look at this map, you can see that the map with the darkest hue are the countries that went through the most colonial transformation by that assessment, and the lightest ones went through the least. And like since we were looking at India, India's pretty dark over there. And what we can also see in this case is, in this case, I used a ridge regression just because I wanted to avoid the issue of multicollinearity. And you can see the coefficients for significant variables, and this shows which were the variables that were most likely to impact the transformation of a colony today. So over here, you can see economic transformation was really, really high up. A political transformation was extremely significant, or even when you look at colonial border split. So a good example of why, like, or where colonial border split became a big issue was, again, if you look at India, when Pakistan and India were split, it was when the British had left. And so this left us with disputed territory in Kashmir, which is now one of the oldest conflicts that the world has seen. And this has caused so much military outrage. It's caused so much cost to the culture, the social being of people, and the divide. And it really stems from when the split happened, when the British had left. And so with this regression model, we can assess how much or to what extent the transformation took place. Alongside that, I did a k-means validation method and a k-means clustering algorithm to see whether there were clusters. And interestingly enough, you can see, and this is more detailed so in the paper, but different eras of history experienced colonialism differently, because there was an era where the Spanish were the dominant colonizers, and then there was the era of the British where they were the most prominent colonizers. And the technique at which they performed their colonialism was very, very different. So the British changed a lot of things systemically. So their transformation really outlasted, and it's something that's still present in a lot of different countries today. So that being said, a quick just wrap up of why this kind of analysis is important and where it could be used. I think it's like looking at what kind of colonialism was done, seeing the transformation and the impact of it. With this, obviously, it needs more research just because there's not much in literature regarding colonialism and looking at machine learning or regression analysis with it. But if we can better understand how much and to what extent colonial transformations were taking place, we can have conversations about reparations. We can have conversations about how should we understand colonialism and teach colonialism in education when, like there are young children like me who don't get the exposure to it, and they only get a one-sided exposure. Because right now, a lot of textbooks and a lot of information that's passed on is either anecdotal, or whatever numbers there are the numbers that have been written by the successors or the victors of history. And so this can be a start in creating history in a way that is validated, in a way that has quantifiable evidence, and we can bring the narrative of what the actuality of these millions of people experienced. With that, this is a very complex paper, so I'm more than happy to talk offline about it, and keep going. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aditi. Yeah, for a short, like cut it off a little bit, and also we're able to get this screen share going. So thanks again.